The Discontented Ghost, Chapter 17. The next sound I heard was a rap at the door. Yes? Get ready, Simon. Right away. Lady Eleanor's steps receded. Shaking myself awake, I rose and dressed with care. Whilst putting the finishing touches to my attire, I looked out my window, and there across the park came Miss Virginia, her little pony moving at a sedate trot through the brilliant sunshine of a splendid morning. Closer and closer to the house she came until I began to grow concerned. Don't fail me now, Ellie, I muttered anxiously. I should have known better. All at once, the most extraordinary assemblage of large black clouds came rushing together from all directions, out of nowhere, and began elbowing each other like toughs in a barroom, directly over Virginia's head. The result was the fiercest one-minute cloudburst it has been my privilege to witness. For 60 seconds it raged, after which the skies became as cloudless and peaceful as ever. Leaving Virginia in much the same condition reckless Rupert and I had been in after our visit to the blue bedchamber. From the house came hurrying the angular figure of Mrs. Umney. "Mercy me! Just see what's happened to our poor girl. Why, she's drenched to the skin." "Yes, and look at my hair," wailed Virginia, brushing sodden tresses out of her eyes. "It's horrid." "Well, now, we wouldn't want a certain young man to see us looking like this, would we?" said Mrs. Umney. "Just you go round the old east wing there and take the back stairs, dearie, and that way you can return to your room through the back passage without being seen." Thus it was that Virginia rode her pony round to the rear of the old east wing, turned it loose there to find its way to the stables, and came up the back staircase. And thus it was that she passed a secret door that had been left ajar, and peeping inside, saw a melancholy figure seated in a despairing attitude in an old armchair. I hope you will read Oscar Wilde's account of Virginia's visit to the tapestry chamber. By this point in his narrative, the information had become extremely sketchy. Either that, or he simply decided to tailor events to suit his own taste as an author. Oscar always was headstrong. At any rate, what actually happened was quite different from his version. "Oh, it's you," said Virginia, after staring at me briefly and without the slightest fear. She was a natural-born ghost acceptor. Then she noticed the blazing fire I had thoughtfully provided in the grate of my fireplace, and added, "May I come in? I'm absolutely drenched." "By all means, please do." I sprang up to escort her to a spot in front of the fireplace, where I had her stand with her back close to it, in order to dry out her riding habit. As a result, she was enveloped in a veritable cloud of steam during the whole of our conversation, giving the tapestry chamber the atmosphere of a Chinese hand laundry. But then I could hardly have taken her where we were going in such damp condition. She would have caught her death of cold. "Well, so this is where you live, is it?" she said, glancing round with that fine freedom in her large blue eyes. "If you can call it living," I replied, remembering to resume my melancholy air. "Poor thing, you do look wretched. I should have expected to find you more cheerful, after the great success you had with Cousin Henry. We're ever so grateful." It did go off well, didn't it? Resisting an impulse to gossip about Cousin Henry for a moment and have a few laughs, I forced myself back into melancholy mold. And yet, I am not happy. "Is it your conscience that's bothering you? I know, of course, that you have been very wicked." "What do you mean, wicked? If anyone has been wicked, it's those two brothers of yours." "The twins? Why, you almost scared them to death last night." I chuckled vainly. "I suppose they woke up the entire household." "No, only me." "Only you?" "They didn't dare tell Mama and Papa they'd been running around outside after midnight. But they had to tell someone, so they came in and shook me awake." "What were you doing down there in that awful place, anyway?" "Never mind. Nothing wicked. I was merely getting a little of my own back." "Now don't pretend you're not wicked, because Mrs. Umney told us, the first day that we arrived here, that you had killed your wife." "That old chatterbox. Your wife?" "Mrs. Umney." "Well, did you kill your wife?" "Well, yes, but it was a purely family matter, and concerned no one else." "What a terrible thing to say. It is wrong to kill anyone." "You didn't know her. My wife was very plain, never had my ruffs properly starched, and knew nothing about cookery. Why, there was a buck I had shot in Hogley Woods, a magnificent pricket, and do you know how she sent it up to the table? I shall spare you all the details. Wrong, indeed. And when it comes to that, I went on, seeing the opening I had been waiting for, if we're going to be nicey-nicey about things, I don't think it was very nice of her brothers to starve me to death, even though I did kill her. Starve you to death? Oh, that's dreadful. Is that your trouble? Are you hungry? If you are, I can bring you some delicious chicken soup. Mrs. Umney sees to it that cook always has some ready for anyone who... Cook? Mrs. Umney makes the chicken soup herself. Does she really? Well, it's awfully good. I smiled at the dear girl. Virginia, I must say you're quite nice. Altogether different from the rest of your family, all of whom have had their moments of being objectionable. Well, you're a fine one to talk about that. Don't think I didn't know who stole the paints out of my box to try to furbish up that ridiculous blood stain in the library. First you took all my reds, including the vermilion, and I couldn't do any more sunsets. Then you took the emerald green and chrome yellow, which left me nothing but indigo and Chinese white. At least I didn't try to duplicate the blue blood of the Cantervilles. No, but what about the emerald green? Who ever heard of emerald green blood? Caterpillars. Ugh. Well, what was I to do? That elder brother of yours put me in a difficult position with that cursed detergent stick of his. Well, I was very annoyed, but I thought you were having troubles enough as it was, so I never told on you. I know, and that was sporting of you. You are a dear, kind girl, Virginia, and for that reason, the only person at Canterville Chase who can possibly help me. Really? How can I help you? I sank wearily into a chair with a sigh that would have done credit to Sir Henry Irving. I want to go to sleep, and I cannot, I groaned. Virginia's beautiful blue eyes regarded me incredulously. Can't sleep? Well, it's the simplest thing in the world. Even babies know how to do it. That may be, but I have not slept for 300 years, I said sadly. For 300 years I have not slept, and I am so tired. My words, beautifully delivered, if I do say so myself, struck home. Her lovely face grew grave, and she came over to kneel at my side, enveloping us both in a cozy cloud of steam as she looked up into my face. Poor, poor ghost, she murmured. Have you no place where you can sleep? Far away beyond the pine woods, I answered in a low, dreamy voice, there is a little garden. There the grass grows low and deep, and there in the great white stars of the hemlock flowers, where the nightingale sings all night long. All night long he sings, and the cold crystal moon looks down, and the yew tree spreads out its giant arms over the sleepers. No romantic young girl who had been exposed to the novelist of that day could have missed my meaning. Virginia's eyes grew dim with tears. You mean the Garden of Death, she whispered. Yes, death. Death must be so beautiful, to lie in the soft brown earth, with the grasses waving above one's head, and listen to silence, to have no yesterday and no tomorrow, to forget time, to forgive life, to be at peace. You can help me. You can open for me the portals of death's house, for love is always with you, and love is stronger than death is. With your help I may yet lie with my loved ones in yonder garden, I said, waving a dramatic hand in what I intended to be the general direction of the family burial ground. Actually, I was pointing toward the vegetable garden, but then I often get mixed up when I'm inside with the drapes drawn. Tell me, Virginia, have you ever read the old prophecy that is inscribed on my window? No, how could I? I've never been here before. No, of course not. Silly of me to ask. I'm afraid I'm not myself today. Does the prophecy have anything to do with your dying? Yes. Virginia's lips trembled. Then I don't want to see it, because I don't want you to go, she declared. We'd all miss you terribly now. Well, that's very flattering, Virginia, but we all have to go sometime. However, let's drop the subject. We can come back to it later. I think we've had enough of the sadness for the nonce. Hence loathed melancholy, as Milton was wont to say in his lighter moments, which I might add were few and far between. Let me show you something that will bring the bloom back in your cheeks. I had reminded myself I had better put her firmly under obligation before pressing her to do a favor she might otherwise resist doing. Opening a cupboard, I took out the musty jewel case. Here is something that should solve certain problems in respect to a certain Prince Charming. Duke Charming, said Virginia automatically, her eyes growing round with curiosity as she gazed at the ancient case. I handed it to her. Just open it, if you please. She opened it and gasped. Good heavens, what are these? "The Henry VIII rubies," I responded with a courtly bow. "The real thing. My ancestor, good Sir Alfred, passed off a fake necklace on the king and kept the good stuff for himself. They belonged rightfully to the king the instant he demanded them, however, so no court in the land would deny these jewels were once legally the property of King of England. Now you can fulfill the terms of that hated clause and let those blasted guardians of Cecil's go hang," I chuckled. "Of course, when it is known what these are, old Lord Grubb will have no choice but to turn them over to the authorities for inclusion in their proper place among the crown jewels in the tower. And that will really gall the old warthog, but it won't matter to you, as you will have fulfilled your obligation." By now Virginia was starry-eyed, and so overcome she threw her arms around me and planted a kiss on my cheek. "Oh, that was cold," she said, chafing her frosted lip. "But I don't care. You're the dearest old ghost ever. How did you happen to find the jewels?" "That secret must go with me," I replied, "to my grave. Speaking of which, my first step must be to acquaint you with the old prophecy I mentioned. If you kindly step over to the window." I led the way like a floor walker and swept back the curtains. There, incised into the pane in impeccable antique lettering, curious black letters was Oscar's vague description. 6 lines of the verse glinted in the sunlight. "When a golden girl can win prayer from out the lips of sin, when the barren almond bears and the little child gives away its tears, then shall all the house be still and peace come to Canterville." The original concluded with Rackley Mill, of course. The neat substitution was mine. "A very precious diamond inscribed these verses here long ago," I murmured. "But I don't know what they mean," said Virginia. "They mean," I said sadly, and here Oscar quoted me correctly, "that you must weep for me for my sins, because I have no tears, and pray with me for my soul, because I have no faith. And then, if you have always been sweet and good and gentle, the angel of death will have mercy on me. You will see fearful shapes in darkness, and wicked voices will whisper in your ear, but they will not harm you. For against the purity of a little child the powers of hell cannot prevail." It is almost unbelievable the bilge one can produce when the occasion demands it. But of course, at Virginia's age, it's just the sort of stuff that goes over like a house afire. She drew herself up like Joan of Arc. "I am not afraid," she said firmly, "and I will ask the angel to have mercy on you." I took her hand, the one that was not clutching the jewel case. "Then come with me." As I said, Oscar got that one speech down correctly, but after that he fell apart again. Our departure from Tapestry Chamber, as he imagined it, was a perfect example of Victorian fantasizing. Oscar, you know, was completely a product of the Victorian era. It was his glory and his downfall. As I led Virginia across the dusky room then, he had it that on faded green tapestry were broidered little huntsmen. They blew their tasseled horns, and their tiny hands waved her to go back. "Go back, little Virginia," they cried. "Go back." But the ghost clutched her hand more tightly, and she shut her eyes against them. Horrible animals with lizard tails and goggle eyes blinked at her from a caravan chimney piece and murmured, "Beware, little Virginia, beware. We may never see you again." But the ghost glided on more swiftly, and Virginia did not listen. When they reached the end of the room, he stopped and muttered some words she could not understand. She opened her eyes and saw the wall slowly fading away like a mist, and a great black cavern in front of her. A bitter cold wind swept round them, and she felt something pulling at her dress. "Quick, quick," cried the ghost, "or it will be too late." And in a moment the wainscoting had closed behind them, and the tapestry chamber was empty. The door closed behind us was more like it. There was no way in the world a healthy, flesh-and-blood, adolescent girl like Virginia could walk through wainscoting without doing herself a great deal of damage. Oh, perhaps in some of these modern condominiums, but not in Canterville Chase. No, we went out through the door and took my familiar route down the back staircase, and then down an interminable stone spiral staircase that leaves one dizzy, and along a dank, dark passage to Robin's hideaway. There lay Robin Clump in his skeletal pathos. I swept a hand in his direction. "I'm sorry to have to drag you down here, Virginia, but after all, we can't have a first-class funeral without some earthly remains. Think of it. My poor bones have lain unburied these 300 years, I exclaimed, and pointed out some of the more touching details, such as the trencher and you are placed just out of reach of the long, fleshless fingers. Virginia was terribly shocked, of course. How horrible, she cried. You mean her brothers really did a mean thing like this to you? Yes, family feeling ran high in those days. She glanced at the skeleton, then at me. You look shorter than you do now. Skeletons shrink. Of course. Ghosts tend to be tall. Oh. She sniffed, and I assumed she was about to weep, but instead she said, It smells like someone's been smoking in here. I protested rather loudly. That's hardly possible. These old dungeons always have a peculiar odor. Are you sure Wash hasn't been sneaking down here? I know he's bought a pipe. Wash? Certainly not. Oh, well. For a moment, she stood gazing down piteously at the pathetic relics, and the atmosphere of the place began to get to her. Her tears began to flow, and kneeling beside the skeleton and setting the jewel case aside, she clasped her hands and began to pray silently. When she had finished, she rose and faced me with a quiet dignity beyond her tender years. I shall inform Lord Canterville and my family, and your poor dear remains shall be given the proper burial you have yearned for so long in vain. We shall give you an absolutely dreamy funeral. Dreamy? Where did you get that word? I don't know. It just popped out. I was not only impressed, I was awed. Virginia, this day you have bridged the centuries. You have spoken in the tongue of another age. Time means nothing here, I told her, and bowed over her hand. Thank you, my dear, thank you. Fortunately, I did not have to conceal my happiness, though it emanated from a source other than what she supposed. I was recalling the terms Lady Eleanor had conveyed to me. Before you will ever be permitted to leave Canterville Chase, you must first be officially declared dead and buried. Silently, I led my young helper away, up to the lower landing of the back staircase, and there I took my leave. You have freed me, I told her. Virginia stood, clutching the jewel case to her bosom. She had never looked more appealing. Her eyes misted over, and of all her tears, those were the ones I cherished. We'll miss you, Sir Simon, she said once more. We'll miss you dreadfully. I bowed my head. Thank you again, my dear, and farewell. Stepping back and throwing her a heartfelt kiss as I touched my fingers to my lips, I turned toward the wainscoting and disappeared from her sight forever.